This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
GPS, how are you? You know, you got paid a compliment randomly yesterday. I walked into a restaurant and some guy came over and introduced himself, said he's a loyal listener and is really a big fan of GPS. And
oh, that's very nice.
Wanted to know if he had to post to get merch or whether just an informal comment could get him merch. So I told him he'd have to listen. So he's got to post and say he's the guy and name the restaurant, and then he would probably get the merch.
Yeah, when our restock comes through, we'll do our best to get something out to him.
Have you taken care of that, or did you give it to the powers that be?
I did, and I followed up at a Lock and Yacht establishment that you were attending, and last I heard, it was still in process.
Got it. Perfect. How are you, by the way?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm great. I've got no complaints. You look like a little, I'm going to say, not quite melancholy, but measured today.
Yeah, I got some pretty disappointing news this morning, so I'm a little frustrated, but nothing that I won't get over.
Okay. Anything I can help with?
No, it came from you, so it's all good.
Oh God. Okay. Well, I'll remember that. There couldn't be more a stranger story this week. I know that we could talk about the DNC and things of that nature, but the title of the program is Reasonable Doubt. The story is a case that was tried. When did the verdict come in on this case? Do you remember? It was tried in the federal court in the Northern District of California. Two defendants.
Yeah, the verdict came down in the first week of June, if memory serves correctly.
Okay, you want to do the summary of the case?
Sure. So the headlines that most people here will remember and be familiar with was that in the past week or so, a large sailing yacht sunk off the coast of Italy. It was in the early morning hours, and out of nowhere, a large weather event came about and broke the mast on this ship. It capsized it, and I believe there were 22 occupants at the time, including, guests and staff, and 15 or 16 of them were able to make it off the boat and were rescued out of the water, and 5 or 6 were missing for quite a bit of time, presumed dead now, many of which I believe have been recovered. And it made headlines because one of the occupants was a tech billionaire named Mike Lynch, and his daughter and his wife. The wife made it into the water and was rescued. And sadly, he and the daughter and 4 others, I believe, perished. And it was a big tragedy. It was, from my reading, something that is, depending on the source, being attributed to global warming phenomenons where these micro vapor-based tornadoes can occur in the water when the temperatures are just right. And it happened very quickly, and it was very tragic and made a lot of headlines.
So the Mike Lynch was the person who was acquitted 3 months ago on a case that arose out of, I believe, was it HP's acquisition of his company for...
Correct. For, I believe, $11 billion. I believe the company was called Autonomy, and he and his partner, their company was acquired by HP, $11 billion acquisition. Several different people throughout the company have been charged in the case. The CFO, I believe, was charged in 2018 and served 5 years. He and his co-founder, who I believe his name is Chamberlain, Stephen Chamberlain. They were both charged with 15 counts, and over the course of a 3-month trial in the Northern District of California, they were both acquitted on all 15 counts.
On all of the counts, their lawyer for Mr. Lynch, who died, was Chris Morvillo, who tragically was also on that yacht and died as well.
Yeah.
And Chris Morvillo is one of the, was only 59. I don't even think he'd reached his 60th birthday, was in his prime, he was at Clifford Chance, but he had had a wonderful career and was one of the finest criminal defense lawyers around, and was there presumably celebrating with his client. And then unbelievably, what is the serendipity? The other defendant, Chamberlain, was killed by a car accident in the UK within the last 14 days.
Something like that. Yeah. A few days prior to the yacht sinking. So you mentioned the attorney was in the prime of his life. So were both of these co-founders. They were both in their 50s as well. And the co-defendant was jogging in the UK, based on reports, and was struck by a car and succumbed to his injuries a few days later. Just a few days before the yacht sank. So we've got both of these defendants who beat 15 counts in federal court, are acquitted on all 15, and they both die in tragic accidents by all accounts within 10 days of each other, just 2 or 3 months after beating the charges. And for anyone who's not following the story, this yacht that sank was not a small boat. It was 186 feet. So for a weather phenomenon to break the mast and capsize the boat, I mean, that's quite something.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. That trial and the legal sojourn they were on. By the way, Gary Linsenberg, I believe, tried the case for who was not on the boats. Gary is out of LA here, part of the Bird Marilla firm, which is a very fine firm, criminal defense firm, mostly in civil litigation here in LA. Gary tried that case as well. And out of the 4 people, the 3 or 4 are dead. He's the last one standing. Just a tragic turn of events to have both defendants and the lawyer for the lead defendant all killed within the span of a very short time period. Just awful. And Lynch's daughter, I believe, his young daughter, was one of the, as you mentioned, one of the fatalities as well. It's just awful.
You've really got a feel for the mother who survived. I mean, I was discussing it with one of our colleagues at work earlier this week. It's just, how, God, trying to go on after something like that, where you're the lone survivor. Excuse me. I've been sick all week, so I'm getting over something. So apologies to everyone who is screaming at their phone, wondering what's wrong with my voice, but I'm a little under the weather. But yeah, trying to go on after something like that and the survivor's guilt that goes along with it is just unimaginable.
Yeah, it really is. Now, there's another story that I just wanted to touch on because it's so frustrating. And kudos to Brett, our virtual researcher, who pointed it out. The Breonna Taylor ruling. You want to summarize that, Gary? Because for those loyal listeners who have listened to you and me talk about the speaking of sojourns, the qualified immunity and the perils of trying to pursue justice in these shooting cases. Listen to this.
Yeah, this is going to be a slightly different take from anyone who heard us cover this back when we were doing it with Adam. Judge Charles Simpson III in the Western Kentucky U.S. District Court on Thursday ruled that Breonna Taylor's death was triggered by the actions of her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who fired shots at what he believed were intruders when a team of police officers entered the home with what it turned out was a no warrant situation, but they entered the home to do a search with an illegal warrant, and he fired shots with his legally obtained and owned weapon, trying to defend himself. And this judge has ruled that his firing at the sounds that he heard of somebody entering his home was the cause of death for Breonna Taylor, who was ultimately shot and killed by police officers. That goes ahead and lowers the threshold for the officers who are being charged in the falsified warrant from felonies that carry a life sentence down to misdemeanors.
Well, the thing that is so entirely frustrating to me as somebody who does both criminal and civil over the years is, can you imagine if if that boyfriend was charged with the crime, or if you did the thought experiment, the idea that the causation was interrupted by his firing, as opposed to the entry into the house where you're lawfully residing, is just so inexplicable to me. And that you're not going to, or that you're going to cut off the causation and say that's a superseding cause. Or a but-for cause. I hate to get into the weeds here, but this idea that somehow when somebody enters the house on basis of a falsified warrant, sets into action these set of circumstances, if that person who had been entering the house was not law enforcement and was a civilian and did not get the cloak of law enforcement, there are prosecutors all throughout the country that would have no hesitation on filing charges against the civilian who was breaking into the location and who ended up causing the death because of that break-in. But here, because they're law enforcement, we have created this artificial construct that basically cuts off the causation, which is intellectual gymnastics, the like of which you're hard pressed to ever come up with in any other context.
I would call it intellectual breakdancing, a la the Australian who made headlines in the Olympics, because it's just nonsensical. It's absolutely outrageous that this is, something where this judge is not only going to say that the civilian in his own home, who is presumably thinks he is trying to defend against a break-in, is the cause of death from a bullet fired by a police officer, but also we're going to set aside the fact that the warrant that would allow them to come in the home in the first place was illegally obtained and meritless. That's just going to be set aside, and we're going to reduce the penalty over the people who did the gymnastics to get the illegal warrant because this gentleman was trying to defend his home.
We're saying basically, okay, everything that transpired after you fired the shots, mind you, after you came in, broke the door, everything that transpired, we're going to put to the side, and we're going to say causation starts when the person who is in their house, remember the whole "my home is my castle" doctrine.
Yeah.
That person, when they react, we're just going to construct this this artifice that says that's when this chain of causation starts, not anything that happened prior to that.
It's absolutely outrageous, and I'm sure that there will be an appeal here. I just the idea that this judge can parse this out in such a way that he can get to that result is outrageous as an American citizen. I think what you will about all the people involved, but just place everyone as a John Doe. I think any American would say that they would want the ability to defend themselves, and the fact that doing that would result in the death of their loved one and that would be excused by a court is just absolutely unfathomable.
And just for a second, you're in bed, somebody breaks in illegally, which, nobody's questioning that at this point. Are you supposed to sit there, come out of your sleep-like or coma-like sleep
and do a census?
Right. What I don't understand what you're supposed to do. What is the policy that you're supposed to get killed or risk getting killed because you can't do the analysis of whether it's an intruder or an illegally obtained warrant or a lawfully obtained warrant? And so to vindicate your rights, you need to die. The whole thing to me is just absolutely inexplicable, but it's inscrutable.
Yes, it's inexcusable. I mean, I really hope that the appeals court see the light on this, because if this is something that is allowed to stand, that is just unconscionable.
Then I guess let's end today, because it seems like in the last 3 weeks, there's been a flurry of Peterson chatter, and I think that unfounded. There's 2 documentaries that have been released, neither of which I have watched, in truth be known, but anybody who's watched this or anybody who knows me knows that, that's it's been 20 years and I still maintain the same opinions I had then I have now. But, you are closer to what's happening this week than I am, I guess is the best way to put it.
Maintain the same opinions, if not the same mustache, I guess we could say.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot grayer. That's
all right. Well, yes, there are definitely 2 documentaries, one on Netflix. By
the way, though, 20 years later, mustaches are starting to make a comeback.
They sure are. I meant it as a compliment. I've been reviewing some footage, so I've seen a lot of archival Garrigus footage in the last few weeks. So I meant it as a compliment. But there are, as you alluded to, 2 documentaries, one on Netflix, one on Peacock, and they include some recent footage of Scott Peterson doing video chats with some of the reporters from jail. And I've pulled a clip of the Peacock documentary that we'll watch, and then we can react.
So if you didn't kill Lacey, who killed Lacey?
Yeah, there was a burglary across the street from my home. There are a lot of people off her. And I believe that Lacey went over there to see what was going on. That's when she was taken.
So I hadn't realized from the clips that I was pulling that didn't include any reference to the infamous mustache, but I assure you it was prodigious. Or anyone who wants to go and Google Mark Garrigus, Scott Peterson, you'll find examples. But that is the newly released footage of Scott opining on his theory of the murder from the Peacock doc.
Yeah, I tried that case, as you know, with Pat Harris, who was my then partner. And Pat was kind of, I would say, early money on the burglary across the street. And that's to some degree why the more recent revelations about a van having been torched or set on fire in an area of town that was fairly close by, and those reports and kind of all of the things that surrounded that have such significance now, and why that fire investigator felt compelled to bring forward that information recently on the heels of the order to show cause and the other hearings that the LA Innocence Project have ably been bringing forward. I mean, that, I'll never forget, I mentioned it before, the day the verdict came in, we were handed discovery, and that had a lieutenant at the Chino prison. I believe it was Chino, but I remember his name. He had overheard an inmate talking to somebody on one of the monitored phones, and the conversation surrounded this inmate and his, whatever it was, friend, brother, relative, whatever it was. It was a monitored conversation in which they talked about Lacey confronting while the burglary was happening. And that, to me, I'll never get over the feeling I had where I just wanted to, the rage I felt about having devoted a year to defending this case. And then that was when we get it on the day that the verdict comes in, after the jury had been deliberating for 9 days, after the judge had removed juror after juror who was hanging that jury. It was a hung jury, absent, taking the people who were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt and excusing them and removing them from the jury. It's the most frustrating thing you can even imagine. And like I say, now to hear that there were these reports and that they had claimed that it didn't really matter, and they didn't think that was exculpatory when they knew clearly that it was exculpatory, they being law enforcement. And by the way, the law is that law enforcement, for purposes of Brady, which is the disclosure of exculpatory information. Law enforcement includes everybody on the team. And in California specifically, that includes going all the way down to the corner. It would include going over to the Department of Justice, who does the testing. Everybody, anything exculpatory, there's a duty that is put onto the prosecution. So you've got that. You have the prosecution now, and I have not been in the courtroom, but I have been provided with their statements that they still believe in the integrity of this conviction. They still believe that they've got the right person, yet they're fighting the retesting of the evidence. And it's mind-boggling to me. If you believe that that there isn't a problem, you've got the right person, why are you fighting so hard against the retesting of evidence 20 years later when you know beyond any shadow of a doubt that the ability now to test things and to do the actual scientific work is light years ahead of where it was back then? And I will remind people, if you think I'm kidding, remember, prior to this case, we had to do a 1-week hearing before trial started for the prosecution to be able to admit mitochondrial DNA, the hair that was found in the boat. That mitochondrial DNA, up until this case, was not even admissible in California. So that shows you in the 20 years how far we've come. And now they're fighting the testing of items that have been preserved during all of this time. Mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, it's for anyone who's just a listener, this is something that you have never changed your tune on, and you have always been fighting hard for the injustice that was suffered in this case. And I know that this is divisive, and I encourage everyone.
And it's polarizing, and I will say it, and I'll say it again. I've said consistently ever since then, when people will say, well, what about this? And they'll say, well, that's not what the evidence is. Well, what about this? That's not what the evidence is. You can go through the whole litany of the urban legends that surround Scott Peterson, but what it comes down to is exactly that clip you played, that people default to. Well, he lied about cheating, so therefore he must be guilty. Not understanding, and I'm as responsible as anybody else for not being able to convey that, or persuasively enough. He understood, being in Modesto, what happened to Gary Condit and Chandra Levy, because he was front and center to what had happened just 2 years before that, and how people had missed who the actual perp was in that case because they were so fixated on the salacious aspects. He knew that. That was something that was wall to wall, emanating internationally from Modesto. So you have to understand that backdrop. He knew the minute Amber Fry surfaced that was it. Game over. He was suspect number one, and he was never going to get Lacey and his unborn son back.
Well, I encourage everyone to go check out the documentaries on whatever service they most prefer, and form your own opinion. But we are certainly have been in lockstep on this program since we started it almost 10 years ago. So we will continue to watch for updates. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Gary, see you tomorrow, hopefully.
All right. See you then. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.